All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to completely unpack the fascinating, kind of invisible architecture of human interaction. Think about this for a second. Think about the hushed, super careful tone you use when you're asking a question in a completely silent library. And then compare that to the screaming, unfiltered joy you share with a best friend at a packed concert. Have you ever actually noticed how drastically your communication style shifts depending on exactly where you are and who you're with? I mean, the way you speak to your best friend is entirely different from how you might address a room full of total strangers. And today, we are going to explore exactly why that happens. We'll be looking at the invisible environmental factors that completely govern our speech. We're going to take a really cool journey that starts from the quiet, private dialogue happening right now inside our own heads, and we'll expand that all the way outward to the massive, mediated channels that connect the entire globe. So here is our roadmap for the explainer. We're going to define the speech environment, contrast formal and informal styles, figure out how to really master our self-talk, explore interpersonal dynamics, and then finally scale all the way up to public and mass media. Let's get to it. Section 1. The speech environment. Let's lay down the foundational building blocks that drive literally all of our interactions. So, let's start by defining what we actually mean by speech context. You see, communication is never just about the literal words you choose to use. It encompasses the entire situation, the physical environment, and the specific circumstances surrounding that interaction. You can really think of these environmental factors as a strict set of invisible rules that you're constantly following without even realizing it. Factors like your physical location, the time of day, and especially the social hierarchy in the room, they heavily dictate exactly how we speak, how we physically present ourselves, and even the channels we use to deliver our message. To put it in perspective, if you are talking to a professor in their official office versus bumping into that exact same professor at a local coffee shop, the environment completely changes the rules of engagement, right? The environment is essentially the stage you're standing on, and it absolutely determines the type of performance that's required from you. But before we get too deep into all these different types of environments, we absolutely have to anchor ourselves to one core truth. The ultimate overarching goal of communication, no matter the context, no matter the scale, is mutual understanding. Period. Whether you are whispering a secret to a close friend or broadcasting a message to millions of people, the end goal of all speech is always, always to have your ideas accurately understood by the receiver. Have you ever had a conversation just go completely off the rails? Usually it's because mutual understanding failed. Maybe there was overwhelming environmental noise, or maybe someone completely misread the context of the room. The reality is, if mutual understanding isn't achieved, true communication hasn't actually occurred. It's just noise. Moving on to Section 2, formal versus informal styles. Let's look at how these environments literally shape the structure and the vocabulary of what we say. In our daily lives, we essentially have two primary styles at our disposal, formal and informal, and they are completely different beasts. Formal communication is highly organized, incredibly structured, and it operates with a really high cognitive load. What I mean by that is you are actively thinking about adhering to protocol while you're doing it. It follows strict procedures, usually requires some form of documentation, and it strictly avoids slang. It's built from the ground up for precision and record keeping. On the flip side, we have informal communication. This flows completely naturally. It's highly spontaneous, heavily relational, it relies on simple everyday words, and it absolutely does not need any sort of documentation. Psychologically speaking, informal communication allows for vulnerability, ease, and comfort. It isn't built for records, it's built for genuine human connection. And here's the key. Your context strictly dictates which of these styles you must use. Imagine a university student's life. When that student is drafting a capstone academic thesis or standing up to give a final presentation, the environment demands that highly formal structure. You have to follow the rubric, you have to avoid slang, you back absolutely everything up with citations. But contrast that exact same student with the informal environment of texting their study group at 2 a.m. In that group chat, you certainly aren't following procedural rules or worrying about professional documentation. It's spontaneous, it's relational, it's packed with slang, and it just flows naturally. The context always determines the tool you pull out of your toolbox. All right, Section 3, Mastering Self-Talk. Now we are going to zoom all the way into the most fundamental speech context there is, the intrapersonal context. Okay, I want you to imagine holding a giant telephone receiver up to your own head. I know it sounds a little funny, but it perfectly captures intrapersonal speech. This context centers entirely on one single person, you. In this internal environment, you're acting as both the sender and the receiver of the message simultaneously. It is a continuous, completely closed loop happening inside your own mind.
So, the really crucial point here is that in intrapersonal communication, the channel you are using isn't the airwaves, it isn't a microphone, and it isn't a digital screen. The channel is quite literally your own brain. This happens anytime you are mentally processing your personal thoughts, ideas, and feelings. And interestingly enough, even inside our heads, we naturally shift between formal and informal styles. Think about it. When you are meticulously mentally rehearsing a high-stakes job interview or practicing exactly what you'll say during a debate, your interpersonal speech is highly formal and structured. But when you're simply daydreaming, reflecting on how your day went, or reacting emotionally to an old memory, it's completely spontaneous and informal. You are basically your own constant conversational partner. And this internal environment, it has massive, very real external consequences, especially for students who are navigating complex social interactions. The quality of this self-talk directly improves your overall quality of life, for sure, but it also deeply, deeply affects your outward performance. Let's think about a student suffering from imposter syndrome right before a massive class presentation. If their interpersonal dialogue is trapped in a negative, anxious, informal spiral, just constantly telling themselves they aren't prepared, that they're going to fail, that internal noise literally bleeds outward. It physically manifests in the interpersonal environment as stuttering, avoiding eye contact, or terrible posture. Mastering your inner environment and deliberately utilizing positive self-talk is the absolute first step to mastering all of your outward communication.
Which brings us to section 4, interpersonal dynamics. Now that we've mastered the inside, let's cross the bridge into an environment that involves 2 or more individuals. I love this quote because the very word interpersonal is incredibly revealing here. The inter part highlights how this type of communication connects people and establishes relationships. But it's the personal part that is truly vital. It means that your unique qualities as a human being actually matter during this interaction. And this is another area where our styles shift heavily based on context. Your interpersonal speech can be highly formal, like when you're respectfully discussing a grade with a stern professor. Or it can be wildly informal, like joking around with a peer in the dining hall. But regardless of the style you're forced to use, you are fundamentally relying on a personal, human connection to share those ideas. So the absolute most basic form of this is called the dyad. This is interpersonal communication occurring between exactly 2 individuals. The environmental rules here dictate that the communication is direct, it is vocal, it provides an immediate response, and it is highly, highly intimate. Because it's such a tight one-on-one feedback loop, you simply cannot hide. The environment practically demands total engagement from both parties, whether you are providing emotional comfort to a friend who is feeling down or offering direct, constructive feedback to a classmate on a project. The dyadic context forces this immediate mutual investment. It's incredibly powerful. But what exactly happens when we add a few more chairs to the room? 3 to 10. That is the magic number range that defines our next environment, the small group context. In a small group, you have more than a dyad, obviously, but no more than 10 people, and they are engaging in face-to-face interaction to accomplish some sort of common goal. But here is the catch. The second you introduce that third person into the mix, entirely new social dynamics enter the fray. You aren't just managing one connection anymore. You are now managing a complex web of interpersonal relationships. And that makes reaching our ultimate goal of mutual understanding significantly more complex. Because it gets so complex, let's imagine a classic student group project that is absolutely falling apart. Everyone is talking over one another, nobody is listening. Because the dynamics shift so drastically with more people, we have some real actionable tips to fix that exact scenario. First, you must communicate specifically to foster creativity, which means you encourage wild ideas without immediately shutting them down. Second, you have to engage deeply in critical thinking to actually solve the problem at hand. But the absolute most important shift is step 3. You must actively value the ideas of others. This means practicing true active listening and totally suspending your judgment. If everyone in those 3 to 10 seats intentionally values each other's input, the ultimate result is step 4, true cooperation. That is how a group efficiently conquers a project together instead of tearing each other apart. Finally, section 5, public and mass media. For our last major zoom out, let's scale things all the way up to the macro level. The first macro environment we hit is public speaking. This is where one single person delivers a message in front of a group or an audience, usually for informational or persuasive purposes. Think of a debate contest or a valedictorian giving a graduation speech. The environmental shift here is absolutely massive. In a large hall, subtlety is completely lost. You can no longer rely on that informal microfeedback you get in a dyad, like a slight nod or a raised eyebrow. The rules of this environment dictate that you must formally structure your speech and use exaggerated channels. You have to project with a much louder voice. You have to use massive, expansive physical gestures, and perhaps even visual aids, just so the person sitting in the very back row can grasp your message. And then, zooming out to the absolute limit of human connection, we have mass communication. This environment is entirely defined and dictated by technology. It is communication mediated through television, radio, newspapers, billboards, the internet, and social media platforms. Here, that immediate, face-to-face human element is completely lost. Whether you are a student journalist publishing an article for the campus paper or you're running a viral social media account, the environment is governed by algorithms, printing presses, or broadcast towers. You are relying on a technological medium to broadcast your message to a vast, totally unseen, and often completely unknown audience.
Let's just take a second to truly appreciate how far we've zoomed out by contrasting these two total extremes. Think about the warmth, the immediate correction, and the deep informality that is possible in a dyad. It's intimate, it's vocal, and it provides an instant, real-time response. If someone doesn't understand you, they frown, and you immediately clarify, right? Well, mass communication is the exact opposite. It's cold, it's mediated by screens or paper, it is incredibly distant, and it operates on a massive scale. And crucially, there is almost never an immediate real-time response from the receiver. It has to be highly structured precisely because you cannot rely on immediate feedback to clarify your point. The environments literally could not be more different, and yet, amazingly, both of them still strive for that singular, ultimate goal, mutual understanding. So, we have journeyed all the way from the silent, private dialogues inside our own minds, straight through to the massive, structured, global broadcasts of mass media. We've seen how every single environment acts as an invisible rulebook, dictating our formality, our structure, our style, and our tools. So I want to leave you with a final thought to really reflect on. Which of these speech environments do you personally struggle with the most? Is it the pressure of that formal public presentation, the complex social dynamic of a small group, or maybe it's just the intimate exposure of a one-on-one dyad? And more importantly, knowing that every single outward interaction begins from within, how are you going to change your own intrapersonal self-talk to master that environment tomorrow? Think about that, apply it, and keep striving for true mutual understanding. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.